British forces launched an attack at Port Stanley on the Falkland Islands and that it is being repelled. London says this is not true. What can you tell us about that?
The only information I have about that attack is the one that you mentioned from our joint staff communique. I have no further information, but the attack doesn't surprise me because it has always been the same. Whenever we are in sound talks, some sort of attack comes. This is a sort of tactic by the British. When when we were talking under the umbrella of Secretary of State Haig, they attacked Port Stanley, Port Argentino. When we were discussing through Presidente Belaunde, they attacked the Belgrano, and this has been very clearly stated by the Prime Minister of Peru, who said that the real the plane should be put on the British because that attack was a real cause for the interruption of negotiations. And now, before we began talks in United Nations, again the British produced a very embarrassing and a very negative and very illegitimate decision, which is the blockade on all Argentine coasts.
Okay, now we'll pause here for a moment, and we're ready to start again. Mr. Minister, you say you have no other information than this brief announcement made by the government this morning. Wouldn't you think that you would be advised if indeed a major attack had come?
Probably a major attack, yes, but you know, communications with the island are not easy, and I don't want to rely on anything but official information addressing the American public.
Mr. Minister, you spoke a moment ago about sound talks, how this attack was coming at a moment of sound talks. What leads you to believe that the talks in New York are promising? Is there any indication that Argentina is willing to compromise now on its position, its prior position of insisting on sovereignty before negotiations begin?
I wouldn't accept the word now, because Argentina has always been ready to compromise. Argentina has always been ready to negotiate. If I may add, Argentina began those negotiations 17 years ago with great patience, with a very peaceful attitude, and always trying to do everything from its part in order to reach a peaceful, honorable, and just agreement. You want me to go further on this, because this is a very important point. What Argentina said is, we, even after the 2nd of April, we said, we want to negotiate. We want to negotiate anything. We want to negotiate, and this is very important, the situation of the islanders. We are ready to grant them every right. Every right they want, of course, religion, of course, language, of course, their own education, of course, the right to property, because the right to property in the islands is not granted to Argentines. And even we are studying the possibility of a minority, national minority status for the islanders. If they want to go, we are ready to buy the land and pay for the land and pay the just price for the land. If even we are ready to accept some sort of international way of establishing that price. If they want to go, we are ready to those that are not landowners to pay the ticket and to give them some money to manage during the trip. If they are not landowners and they want to stay, and there's a great number of them that are not landowners, and I would like to explain this afterwards, to those we are ready to give them access to the land, either in the Malvinas or in our continent, and grant them loans, big loans, soft loans as you call them, to buy that land. If they want to buy land in Australia or New Zealand, we will in some ways give them some sort of aid for them to do that. Do not forget, excuse me.
Well, I just wanted to ask, would you be willing to retreat or bring back your troops from the island if the British were willing to give you their word of sovereignty, but not a prior guarantee of sovereignty?
No, we are ready to withdraw troops if the British withdraw their own fleet, if the authority of the UN is established, and then we will, as part of this arrangement, we will discuss the problem of sovereignty, because we have no doubts about our sovereignty. But beware, there's one thing that you must bear in mind. All this must lead us to the recognition of the Argentine sovereignty of the islands.
So the Argentine position has not changed then, sir? You're insisting that the result, the outcome of the negotiations be Argentine sovereignty over the island?
This is not correct. What we are saying is we are ready to begin negotiations, but those negotiations, in one way or the other, should conduct to that recognition.
But those don't sound like negotiations.
Even if the British do not accept that sovereignty at the very beginning.
But I suppose what makes it so difficult for many outside of Argentina to understand, Mr. Minister, is you seem to be saying, let's give the man a fair trial and then hang him. That's an old saying in the United States. You're saying we're willing to negotiate, but we must know in advance what the outcome of the negotiations are to be?
No, this is not correct. What we have said is this. We want to negotiate in the first place ceasefire. We want to negotiate, and we are ready to negotiate withdrawal of troops and withdrawal of the Navy fleet. We are ready to negotiate the way that the islands should be administered during the period. And we want to settle the fundamentals for the acceptance of the Argentine sovereignty. But we are not saying Britain must accept at the beginning our sovereignty. We are not saying that. We are not putting sovereignty as a precondition for our talks.
Mr. Minister,
But that seems to be somewhat different than what you were saying when Secretary Haig was here,
No.
when you said that sovereignty must be recognized.
No.
That was the last line of your statement, was it not?
No, I'm not. I'm afraid I don't recall having said this. The problem is that we should arrive to sovereignty because we have no doubts about our sovereignty. Our sovereignty has been accepted by the American states individually and jointly in the meeting of the OAS. Our sovereignty has been accepted by many countries in Europe. It has been accepted even by some countries in the Security Council, that even if they voted for the 502, in their speeches they said that they had no doubts about our sovereignty. It has been accepted by the Pope. It has been accepted by the non-aligned countries in 2 statesmen very recently, and in 3 or 4 statesmen.
Well, let me just sum up here. Are you willing to say, sir, now that you no longer have to be guaranteed sovereignty at the beginning of this?
At the beginning. This is now.
You're willing to discuss the issue of sovereignty.
I can define the goals of a negotiation. I cannot beforehand give you the tactics of my negotiation.
Well,
the goal of my negotiation is no doubt, undoubtedly, the recognition of the sovereignty. But I cannot anticipate you, with due respect, the tactics that we will use during our
But you're saying that does not have to be a foregone conclusion.
We do not demand from Britain to sit on the table and say, I recognize Argentine sovereignty at the beginning.
Mr. Minister,
we are not demanding this, but we are seeking, our goal is sovereignty. There is no other goal but sovereignty. Everything else can be discussed with Britain, negotiated, and we are ready, as I have said, to be very generous, not only with the population, with the inhabitants of the islands. We are ready to be generous with Britain itself. If Britain wants a refueling station in the islands, we are ready to grant that. If Britain wants some sort of office or anything of that sort, you know, to keep contact with their investigations in the area, we are ready to grant that. Even if the problem is an economic problem, and I grant you that so far in no part of our discussions the economic problem has come out.
How do you expect Washington's tilt towards Great Britain?
Even in the case of the economic problems, we are ready to discuss with Britain the economic problem and the possibilities of joint ventures for exploiting the natural resources.
I'd like to discuss the American angle for a minute, sir. How do you expect Washington's tilt towards Great Britain to affect relations between Argentina and the United States in the short run and in years to come?
Well, that's a very touchy point and a very difficult one. Let me tell you this. I was very surprised. I can't deny that. I was very surprised at the attitude of the USA after we had so many talks with the Secretary of State. Why I am surprised? I acknowledge that there is a very old and very important alliance between Britain and the United States. By the way, it has always been USA that has helped Britain in one war, in the second war. Britain has always won the war thanks to USA help. But that's another question. Let's have the alliance. Let's have the natural understanding between two Anglo-Saxon people. And let's assume that there's a very intimate relation, political relation between Mr. Reagan and Mr. Thatcher, and that each other really have very similar political and economic problems. I accept all that. But what I do not accept is that I think the Secretary of State has not seen the future correctly, has not assessed the future correctly. In this sense, in the sense that the future for the USA, except if she wants isolationism, the future is Latin America. And you are seeing it. Which is the biggest problem for the USA today? Central America. Even more than the Middle East. Even more than Europe. And there, can the USA afford to do these two things? First, going against a very important decision of the OAS, which was voted by the 4 largest and more influential countries in the continent: Mexico, Venezuela, Brazil, Argentina. This has no precedent in the history. It's the first time that USA has been outvoted by the Rio Treaty on a Rio Treaty meeting in this way.
How far does Washington have to go in supporting Britain before Argentina considers itself in a state of war with the United States? Or how far does Washington have to go before you break off diplomatic relations with the United States?
That's a very hypothetical question. We are very concerned. We are really very, very concerned, because I think that already the USA has gone too far. Has gone too far because I think that the USA should be really neutral. Really neutral, and I don't see what is at stake for the USA. If now, today, we are under the umbrella of the United Nations. We are ready to discuss our problem in the United Nations. We have accepted the authority of the Secretary General. The Secretary General has issued a communique, a press release yesterday night, saying that the talks are on the move, that he is mildly optimistic, that we can go on. Well, then why now, at this very moment, when the talks are going, in the right forum, the USA continues to put pressure on us? This is something I can't understand. I can't understand why the United States doesn't assume a more neutral position at this very moment when peace is being discussed in the right forum.
Mr. Foreign Minister, the Soviet Union is already your country's largest purchaser of grain. Have you talked with the Russians about the possibility of military assistance to you or any other accords if a larger war breaks out over the Falklands?
We haven't. We have excellent trade relations with the with the Soviet Union. In fact, the balance of our trade with the Soviet Union helps us to pay what we owe in the unbalanced trade with the United States. We buy in the United States, we sell in the Soviet Union, and we pay the United States with a price that the Soviet Union pays for our goods.
You
Mr.
mentioned
Foreman,
Central America a moment ago. Officials in Washington have been very hopeful about cooperation between the United States and Argentina in combating insurgency movements in Central America. Is that cooperation now down the drain?
I wouldn't use that expression, no, I don't think it's down the drain, but it would be very difficult for me as a foreign minister or for the president to convince public opinion that we must continue helping the USA when the USA has reacted in our main problem, in the problem which is dearer to our hearts, in the Malvinas, in a way that we didn't expect.
Minister, let's get back to the negotiations here.
But
And
I wouldn't use that word yet.
if I could, what is the key now to getting a ceasefire and to getting some sort of de-escalation of the situation?
Goodwill from the British.
Well, what do they have to do? What would you be willing to do now to have a ceasefire?
They must begin to understand our problem and to understand that the Malvinas, this is something, you know, I'm a conservative. I'm a man who has always been conservative, if you want a progressive conservative, but I've always been in favor of avoiding revolutionary methods in everything, including foreign policy. The word colonialism, I do not accept it very readily, but now, for the first time, I've been convinced that really colonial life and colonialism are facts, real facts of international life. Let me tell you about
We have
Malvinas.
about 1 minute left, sir.
Malvinas is a typical colonial situation. 46% of the land is in hands of one company, a monopolic company that your trust busters would have ended years ago. 80% of the business, 90% of the business carried out by the Falkland Island companies. The second group of landowners is composed of members of the parliament and people very near the crown. Many of the islanders have no access to property, and the Argentines so far haven't the slightest possibility of being landowners there.
Minister, thank you very much. I'm sorry our time is up. Thank you for being with us on Face the Nation.
We'll be taking listening shots of the three reporters individually and together. Everyone can stay in place, please.
I wanted to. We can talk, can't we?
No, you're listening. You're listening.
You want some other questions? In the pipeline there are many.
Oh.
But was it clear, were the answers clear?
Extremely.
What are we waiting for?
You're taking some technical shots now of everybody listening to everyone else. Which is not a bad thing after all.
No, should be the best.
30 seconds. That's a wrap.
I never got a chance to ask you about the expression on your face when you discovered Margaret Thatcher and Alexander Haig in bed together.
You hadn't.
What
It was a good cartoon,
It's
wasn't
a
it?
very good cartoon.
The question I guess we didn't get to ask you is what must happen now for you to begin withdrawing the troops from the island, Mr. Minister?
A clear indication of two things. Who will administrate the islands in the interim period, and that in the basis of negotiations, the reference to some basic documents of the United Nations are duly mentioned.
Which kind of documents? The anti-colonial?
Well, this is part of the negotiations.
But if, I understand what you're telling us this morning. You don't have to have a guarantee of sovereignty in the beginning.
I don't
You have
want
to have
to
it's related that it's a
anticipate.
goal.
I do